Hello friends! To finish the Marvel Crisis Protocol core set, I will show you how to paint the villains. So let's do this! So the first thing that I'm gonna do here is prime my miniatures and I'm gonna use black spray. On top of that, however, I'm gonna use really light gray to create this zenithal highlight. I am also using zenithal highlighting in my other videos where I am also painting Marvel Crisis Protocol. So if you want, you can check out those videos. I have already started glazing with a really dark gray here, and now I'm adding ultramarine blue to this mix, and with that I'm pretty much doing the same thing as with Spider-Man. That means that I'm glazing this miniature and I'm leaving mostly brighter pigment on top of him. I have decided to add some Null oil and I will water it down quite a lot and I will cover all of his coat. Of course, focus on the recesses as you wanna leave the wash there. Now you might even ask why am I watering down a wash, and that is because I don't wanna darken this miniature too much. After doing that, I'm ready to do some highlighting, and basically I picked Fenrisian Grey and I'm adding it to my original mix. With this I will slowly glaze the top areas of his suit. Now of course, if I feel like some areas are more exposed to light than the rest, I will add more paint in there. And that's precisely what I am doing here. I am watering down my paint and I'm adding more layers around his torso. Here you can see some progress with the highlights on his suit. And I will proceed to highlight the edges, and for those I will not water down my paint too much. I would recommend making those highlights thin, as you can make them thicker as you go along the way. To paint the head, I'm taking this really bright red called Evil Sun Scarlet, and I'm just slapping some layer on there. Once you feel like the layer is nice and consistent, you can move on and shade it. So with Agrex Earthshade I will shade those little symbols on his shoulders and his skull. Once again, put emphasis on those recesses rather than those flat surfaces. If you feel like the paint is pooling too much, just spread it with your brush. For highlights, I'm adding Fire Dragon Bright to my Evil Sun Scarlet. I will progressively add more glazes on top of his skull, and for those face features, I will focus mainly on edge highlighting. And you can really take your time as the face is the most important feature of the miniature. Here I'm fixing the mistakes that I made along the way with darker color so the highlights actually make sense. And you can also take this really dark paint and paint his eye sockets. And of course, don't forget to highlight these symbols on his shoulders. With white I will try to carefully paint the eye. And on this eye I will really carefully try to paint a pupil. Now this might take some time, but really focus as this is really important. There are also some metallics on his suit, so paint those with whatever metallic you like. Now I will wash it with Agrex Earthshade instead of Null oil to make it more interesting. And the last thing that I'm gonna do is paint his cube, which I will base coat with Ahriman Blue. Now I will try to imitate this glow effect on this cube, and I will add more and more lighter layers. You can see that I am pushing these lighter layers towards one side of the cube, so the other is still dark and it creates some nice contrast. This is necessary because you wanna make it look like it's glowing. So as I am adding more lighter and lighter layers, you wanna pick probably your second lightest layer and edge highlight all of the sides. And this is pretty much it. Since the cube is supposed to be glowing, there should be some light on his arm, so I will do that real quick. That means that I'm watering down my paint quite a lot and I'm just adding some layers to his arm. And you can just stop whenever you feel like you're done. You can also see that there is no clear separation between the fingers and the cube. So with a really watered down black paint I will create it. And this is it for the Red Skull. We will do the bases once all of the villains are done. Painting Crossbones is quite easy, and I will start with base coat on the skin. I am using Cadian Flesh here, but you can use whatever you like. Once you've got nice consistent layer, I will get Black Templar contrast paint for the suit. And what you can do here is cover the whole miniature except for the white mask and of course the skin. Generally speaking, when you are working with a contrast paint, make sure that you spread your paint very nicely and that you make one consistent layer. So this is the progress that we've got, and we are ready to do some highlights with Fenrisian Grey. And we will actually do this highlight by dry brushing. So wipe most of the paint off and with light downstrokes create this highlight. Put emphasis mostly on those places exposed to light instead of shadows. And once you feel like the layer is pretty nice, just like here, you can move on to Longbeard Grey and do pretty much the same, just with even lighter brush strokes. And in this step, I really want you to imagine where the light hits the most. Once we are done with that, I will pick Drakenhof Nightshade and cover all of the black parts. Now not only will this make the uniform bluish, but also it will sort of unite the colors. And if you don't like the chalky dry brush look, this will definitely tune it down. So the uniform is coming along pretty nicely and it's time to shade the skin. For that I'm gonna use Rakeland Flesh Shade. So cover all of the skin, put emphasis on the recesses of course. And once it's done, put down a layer of Cadian flesh again. I want you to water down this paint quite a lot and definitely leave wash just in the recesses. We will slowly add more lighter and lighter color to the mix to create sort of highlights. You can just take your time to create this gradient on the skin to make it look natural. And once you are happy with the result, it's time to highlight the veins on his biceps and forearms. For that, just pick a really bright ivory color. You can either use this ivory color straight or you can add it to your base skin color. Either way, make sure that these veins are visible. Since I still have the flesh paints on my wet palette, I will paint his eyes. Then I would recommend to fix your mistakes and make a black dot. Then the standard procedure is to add a white dot, and on this white dot place another black dot. This might take some time and adjustments, so just be patient. I will move on to his face mask, which I will base coat with Ultron Grey. For those cracks and recesses in his mask, I will use black. And for all of the edges, I will use pure white. For the metallics, I am using gunmetal. So that is all of the knuckles, buttons, weapons, and all of the tools basically. This is the progress that we've got, and the last thing that we are gonna do here is shade those metallics. For that I will use Noon Oil, which is pretty much my go-to shade when it comes to metallics. And you don't really have to worry if you spill some paint over to the other parts, as the miniature as a whole is pretty dark. And this is it for the Crossbones. Painting Ultron, I would say, is even easier than painting the Crossbones. Since you are starting with metallic, use any spray that you like. And we will right away start highlighting this miniature. I have picked Runefang Steel to highlight every edge on him. So just really carefully pick out every edge that you see, and the more precisely you will do it, the better it will look. As I will go on with the highlights, I will water down this Runefang Steel and I will make a glaze out of it. With this glaze I will go over the flat surfaces. This will create some sort of lighter reflection on his chest, for example. So once you think that your highlights are on point and you are pretty happy with them, you may add a little bit of white to this Runefang Steel and create lighter and thinner highlights. And you can see me that I'm placing these highlights mainly on those main features of this miniature, so mostly around his chest and of course his face. So now, since we are done with the highlighting, we will move on to the next step. Before that, however, I will gloss varnish this miniature to protect it from my aggressive wash. As you will see, I will create my own wash which would otherwise damage my paint job. So once it's varnished, I will create this wash. I will combine black oil pigment and this odorless white spirit into a little cup. And just carefully add more odorless white spirit into the cup and mix it with the oil pigment until you feel like it's of a milky consistency. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. The Now keep in mind that the finer the pigment will be, the better the wash is. So I am adding here more odorless white spirit until I think that it's okay, and I am using walls of this cup to test it. And as I'm putting down this wash on this miniature, you can see that it is spreading quite nicely on those cracks and recesses, and that's exactly what you want. And the great feature of this wash is that it doesn't stain anything around, so you can push it and place it wherever you want. So even if you misplace it completely, you can just move the wash and the area is not gonna be tinted. And this is not only because of the oil wash itself, but also because of the gloss varnish. And once you shaded all of the cracks and recesses, you can see that this miniature is more well defined. And we are gonna move on to paint the only things that are not gonna be metallic, which are the lights. And I will start with Evil Sun Scarlet and place it around these little things. And that's mostly on his legs, around his chest and eyes. If you get a little messy, it doesn't matter at this step, because after all it's supposed to be glowing. So if you spill some paint over to the other areas, it doesn't matter. So this is what it should look like. You can see the areas that have been painted with Evil Sun Scarlet. And now I will take Fire Dragon Bright, water it down quite a lot, and I will place it in the middle of these lights. And at this point you actually wanna be careful to place it just in the middle. Alright, now you can see what we've got. And the last highlight of these lights is gonna be done with yellow. Once again, water it down quite a lot, and now place it just in the middle of the orange parts. That means that you have to be even more careful when placing this paint. Now, since I feel like I need to smoothen it and tune it down, I'm once again taking Evil Sun Scarlet and I'm just glazing over it. So just cover it with this really watered down paint to unite the colors. Also, since I noticed that the wash didn't get everywhere, I am taking pure black to shade such cracks and recesses. And once you got that, Ultron is now finished. For Baron Zemo, I will pick Nagaroth Knight and cover his stomach. For the area above it, that means his chest, neck and head, I will mix Corn Red with Genestealer Purple. Since the base color from the Zenithal highlight is really light grey, one coat should be enough. I have also forgotten about his hands, so cover them with Nagaroth Knight as well. Now I will pick Cantor Blue, water it down and paint his utility belt. I have also decided to add this layer to his boots. Once it's dry, I will pick Contrast Basilicanum Grey and I will cover everything from his pants down. And yes, that means even his boots, even if they are already blue. So just work your way through and make one consistent layer, as that is the key when working with contrast paint. For the jacket, I have also used a contrast paint. I have picked this sort of yellowish brownish paint, which really works well for the jacket. And pretty much the same applies here. You wanna create one consistent layer. You can see that the Zenithal highlight works really nicely, as those shades are still left darker. For the metallics, I am using gunmetal. The only metallic parts here are these wristbands and the swords, maybe a few buckles here and there. For the bordering of his jacket, I am using Ultron Grey. Now you might think that this is a little bit bright, and you would be right, so we will shade it later. I'm getting a gold paint for his belt buckle, for the handle of his sword, and for the little tiara thingy. Once you've put down a few layers on there, it should be looking quite consistent. And we are gonna shade all of those white and metallic parts. So thin down your Nuln Oil and cover those. If you end up using too much on the white parts, it might be a little bit of an overkill, so just be careful with that. And once it's dry, I will really carefully dry brush it with Longbeard Grey. At this point I have decided to highlight the purple parts, so I'm adding white and I'm picking out all of the edges. That includes these little distortions on his stomach. The same thing can be done on his chest and the head. So add a little bit of white to the original color and just carefully put down some layers of that. You can see that I'm glazing over the top surface area with a watered down paint, so do that. And once you are overall happy with the purple, I will take black and I will paint thin black lines around the pattern that he got there. Since there is high likelihood of ruining your paint job, I will recommend using really thin brush and just being really careful. And also his eye sockets are gonna be covered in black too. After that, I will place a small white dot in the middle of the eye socket and call it a day for the eyes. And I don't know how you feel about it, but for me personally this face is pretty much finished. With Rayclan Flesh Shade I am covering all of the golden parts. So that means just his sword handle, his belt buckle and his little tiara thing. To highlight these golden parts I will mix into my original gold a little bit of chainmail silver. And I will highlight all of these golden parts using this mix. I've also totally forgot about these little buckles on his jacket, so pick them out with any metallic that you like. And once you get it, shade it with a search shade. And these little buttons on his belt are gonna be painted with straight chainmail silver. Now this step is purely optional, but I am blacklining the separation between the wristbands and the leather jacket. Basically what I am doing here is painting thin black lines with super watered down black. And lastly, we are gonna edge highlight the sword with Rune Fang steel. And here you go, another villain done. We are gonna do our final villain, which is gonna be Doc Ock. And I will start with the belt, which I will cover in metallic. And of course the tentacles are gonna be covered with metallic paint too. So once you covered them, I will use yellow and I will cover properly his boots, also his gloves and the area around his neck. The rest of the suit, however, is gonna be covered in Caliban green. So do that real quick. And we are gonna shade the yellow with Agrex Earth Shade. And you can be quite generous here, but put emphasis on those recesses. With Nuln Oil, I'm gonna shade all of the metallic parts. So that means his tentacles and his belt. So this is the progress that we've got so far. And I'm coming back to my original yellow and I'm starting to pick out all of the details. So all of the flat surfaces and all of the edges are gonna be picked out. So just leave the wash just in the recesses. Of course, if you feel like some areas are supposed to be a little darker, just leave it unpainted. Here you can really compare the difference between highlighted and non-highlighted boot. And this is quite a difference, but we will highlight it even further. For that I am taking Moon Yellow and I will mostly highlight just the edges, but somewhere on those elevated areas I will put down a glaze layer or two. So now the comparison is even more visible. You can see that the right boot is way more highlighted and really bright. And that's the result that you are aiming for. This is it for the boots and the gloves. And now even the area around his neck. And I want you to really see where I am leaving the wash. Since I still have the yellow on my wet palette, I will mix it with my Caliban green. And with this paint I will slowly start layering his suit. You see, sometimes you cannot just add white to create a highlight. In this case, if you wanna create brighter green, you wanna add more yellow. For example, the same is true for the red, because if you will add white to the red, you will create pink. So you need to add yellow to create highlight color. So I'm just putting down more layers on there with more and more yellow, and I stop whenever I feel like it's done. There are also these little lines on his suit, so I will pick those out with even more yellow added to the green. And now the suit, I feel, is pretty much finished. To highlight the metallic parts, I will use chainmail silver. I was already being quite lazy with that, so I used dry brushing method to highlight it. And you know, dry brushing is fine, but I consider it to be kind of a lazy method, as it is more messy. But of course, around his belt I cannot afford to be messy, to not hit any area around it, so I use edge highlights. Now there is a light source on his belt, so I will glaze it with Fire Dragon Bright. And the same applies for these two tentacles. And of course this light source too. To really brighten the middle section of these light sources, I have picked white. So put down a layer of that just in the middle of those light sources so you can work on it a little further. You can see that I'm combining my orange and yellow here, and with this mix I will glaze over the light sources. I would recommend thinning down this paint way more than you are used to and really taking your time. And as you will push the pigment from the middle outwards, you will hopefully see that it works. And the only part that is left to do is his head. I will start with the hair, putting down a layer of Rhinox hide. To base coat his face, I have chosen Kislev flesh. Do not worry if you hit the glasses, as you can fix that later. To shade the face, I will use Raycon Flash Shade. I am using here the standard procedure to wash it, let it dry, and then come back to my original paint. So I'm coming back to my Kislev flesh and I'm picking out all of the flat surfaces and the edges. I will even add Screaming Skull to my Kislev flesh to create highlights. So I'm mixing that here, and when it's mixed, I am putting it mainly on his chin, on his nose, eyebrows, and maybe a little bit on his lips. To highlight the hair, I am using Gorther Brown. You can see me do quite thick lines on his hair, so I would probably recommend going a little thinner here. And the last part is his glasses. I will base coat those with pure black, then layer the lenses with Corn Red, and finally put a layer of Fire Dragon Bright on the bottom of his lenses. And yeah, there we go. So Dr. Octopus is now ready to smack some ass. To base coat the bases, I am using Stonewall Grey. You can notice that I am not thinning down the paint too much, so it covers well. And there are also some areas that are gonna be metallic. So for those, use either lead belcher or gunmetal. Whenever you are painting any bases, just be really careful around the feet, because you don't want to stain your existing paint job. I'm adding here Flayed One Flesh to my Stonewall Grey, and I will paint these rocks that Ultron and Baron Zemo are standing on. Now, since I want really dark wash, I am mixing Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade. I'm also adding some water to this mix so it spreads along nicely. I'm using this mix to cover the entire surface of all bases. And you can just see here that it spreads along very nicely since it's thinned down. Now I'm using pure black to cover the edges of every base. Once again, just take your time to slowly cover it in multiple thin coats. And this is basically it. Every villain is now ready to wreak some havoc. However, there is this last optional step, and that is varnishing your miniatures. To do that, you can either use matte varnish in a spray can, or you can use matte varnish for an airbrush, which is what I am doing here. So make sure that you cover it from all sides just a little bit, and there you go. Okay guys, so this is pretty much it. If you liked this video, I would really appreciate if you give it a thumbs up. And if you really liked it and you wanna see more, consider subscribing to my channel. And I am really happy to say that we are finished now with the Marvel Crisis Protocol core set, and in the next video I will very likely paint Sons of the Phoenix Marine. Okay, and the last thing that I wanted to say is thank you for 1000 subscribers. It really means a lot to me. And you know, I am just trying my best to put out as much content as I can, but sometimes it just isn't possible. Also, if you want to leave any general feedback, put it down in the comments, and see you guys in the next video. Bye!